My name is Helen Garcia, and you're listening to episode number 46 of Yellow Chair Collective, the podcast. In today's episode, we have my friend, social justice advocate, and clinical therapist, Esther Lee, on the show. Esther got her master's in social work from Columbia University, and today I made the mistake of saying that she worked for the government, but she actually worked for a nonprofit in New York prior to becoming a therapist for the public defender's office. So enjoy today's episode with Esther and learn more about understanding your personal values and starting to tune in with your body. Let's start the show.
You die when you stop learning. Like I finished school. I haven't been officially in school in 7, 8 years now, but
Whoa, it's been that long.
it's been a long time. Um, but um, but the learning process never ends, right? And especially, and that's really the vibe that I bring into my work with clients as well. All right, we're in here for both of us to learn. I'm not necessarily here as the expert, as this person who's going to tell you how to live your life, but I'm also here to learn from you what your life looks like, what you can offer me and teach me, not
Mm,
just for me to grow as a practitioner, but in my daily life as well. And that's one of the biggest joys of being a therapist, I think, to be able to learn and grow with my clients.
mm. Can you speak to that? Because I'm assuming that it triggers a level of humility as a person for you to go, I'm learning from this person. What
Yeah.
are What are the three most valuable lessons you've learned in the 7 to 8 years that you've been on this, like, therapeutic social justice journey?
Oh man. I mean, truly, one of the biggest things has to be you never, and like this is one of those like people throw it out there, but in working in the social justice space and legal spaces and therapy spaces, especially, you really don't know someone's full story. Like,
Wow.
and and there's so much gray area. It's so easy for us to kind of compartmentalize into the black and white. But
Yeah.
if we were to really sit down and learn about somebody's life from beginning to end, you'll learn that things are so much more complicated than they seem on the outside. Um,
Mm.
you said three things?
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay,
so
so
that's
that would be
one.
yeah, so that's one. Um, Another thing is I think it's always so important to remember to find joy in even the
Mm,
smallest of spaces. Some of my fondest memories with clients are even when I know that they're going through probably one of the hardest times of their life, because that's what so much of being a social worker is, right? Like nobody actually wants to work with a social worker. If you have a social worker, things are not going great.
yep.
Um, but in through all of those hard moments, my whenever I notice or I'm with a moment with a client, um, where they're able to crack a joke, where they're able to laugh at something really small and seemingly insignificant, but they're able to be like, haha, yeah, this thing, I'm finding joy in this thing, or I'm able to laugh at this other thing, or yes, this is ridiculous, and I can either laugh or cry, and so I'm gonna choose to laugh in this moment, and like finding humility and just a moment of calmness in those moments as well. And a third one, say, yeah, I mean, just I, stay humble, stay curious.
Mm,
And especially in the more that I work, it's so easy for me to get caught up in the, well, I know what's happening.
mhm,
I know X, Y, and Z. I have this theoretical knowledge, but at the end of the day, again, like we never know
mhm.
someone's full story,
You don't.
and what they might need is not necessarily wisdom that you have, but rather like how can we invoke that knowledge and that wisdom together through
That's so
curiosity and
good.
passion.
That's really good. I actually have a story about that. So the other day I made a new friend, and he's from Minnesota, and he's this, like, white guy. And when he told me he was from Minnesota, I was like, "Okay, like, you probably don't," this is the assumption I was making in my head. I was like, "You probably don't know, like, Tagalog or, like, Filipino culture." And I already put that barrier and distance. And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden, after he introduced himself, he started to speak to me in Tagalog. And I was
Wow.
like, white guy for I literally this is literally what I said out loud. I was like, white guy from Minnesota knows Filipinos. Like, there are Filipinos in Minneapolis. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, my roommate is Filipino. Like, I went to the Philippines last September.
Mhm.
And his family apparently housed people from Ghana and the Congo. They were like missionary housing families. And so I was just really surprised by that. And so when you spoke about like the black and white thinking, I was immediately like taken aback by what you said, because I feel like even me as a therapist, and we do both do this like full time, like it's normal to like create assumptions. But I'm
Mhm.
curious about, like, having practiced that, was there ever a time in your personal life where you were surprised by someone? And, like, when was that?
Oh, man. Surprised by someone. Mm. Actually, I had a very similar moment just last weekend
No
where
way.
my friends and I were in a random grocery store in Joshua Tree. Like, we don't live in
Yeah,
Joshua Tree, so this is an unfamiliar community to us.
yeah.
But and then this like older white man wearing a red hat who started talking to us. And then I don't
Like
even
a
know how.
baseball cap or, like,
Yeah,
cowboy
red
hat?
baseball cap.
Oh, okay, okay.
Red baseball cap. We couldn't there was something set written on it, but we couldn't read it. And then
Sure.
he, like, made a silly comment, and us being, like me and my friends, that I was with were all, like, more petite, young females,
Uh-huh.
uh, so we're, like, on guard, and then all of a sudden he's like so he makes this joke, we didn't really hear what the joke was, and then he's like, "Are you guys Trump supporters?" And we're like, no. And he's like, "Oh, me
Mhm.
neither. Good. I was hoping you guys weren't." And so that was a really interesting moment because all of us immediately assumed that this old white man with a red cap on was a Trump supporter. And then for
Wow.
him to ask that and be nervous about asking us that, like all
Mm.
females of color, was a really interesting moment that really stands out for me. Um,
Mhm.
and it just goes to show, it's like, all right, Esther, you got your assumptions, but this guy actually seems, or one, he told us he was not a Trump supporter, which is great.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, complicated.
Mhm.
But it's that moment of like, you just never know.
You never know.
Yeah.
It's 'cause that story says a lot about you, that you love nature, that you're open to being wrong. And number 3 too is that you really value relationship in your life. Are
Oh yeah,
those 3 things the things that keep you afloat when you're really sad or, like, when you're stressed in your job?
definitely. All of
Okay.
those things. When and it's, and I know when I'm barely afloat, when I'm not accessing those things too.
Really?
It's like this, it's a mutual give and take. If I'm not
Yeah.
out in nature, if I'm not tending to my relationships and um, being open to possibilities, then I know that I'm not in a good place. And in order to get back
Mm,
to that place of feeling more secure and stable, I have to access those things. I have to get out. I have to go walk with friends, and engage that curiosity again.
mm. It kind of reminds me of your story. So, like, if you click on your yellow chair page story, you talk about your career working in the legal system and the social justice system and, like, burning out and wanting to work with high achievers and people in the professional realm. And I can't help but think that there are parallels in your personal story and the people that you want to work with. And so, what people also might not know is that you lived in New York prior to being a therapist in California. So, a lot of your professional career was there before you came
Mhm,
here a couple of years ago. And so,
mhm.
tell me that story of like working in the legal system and then transitioning into therapy, what you started to learn about yourself as you navigated the career space.
Yeah, I honestly, it's like one of those stories of the profession found me versus I found the space in which I felt really passionate about.
Really?
I
How does a
was
profession find you?
it was okay. So I actually decided I wanted to be a social worker when I was 16. I had gone on a missions trip to serve the
Yeah.
Navajo people with my
Cool.
church, which I
Mhm.
have a lot of feelings about that now, but I am grateful for that experience because it led me on
Mhm.
this path.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, it was there that because up until that point, I was like, all right, I'm gonna make a lot of money and spend it all on taking care of people who need financial assistance. And then it was
Mhm.
there while I was working with the folks that we were serving that I was like, no, I actually really, I feel really connected to working with people directly. And I feel
Mhm.
this is an important part of what I need to do. And so I applied to social work schools for undergrad, which is pretty unusual. And then it was during my first field placement that I landed up at the Federal Defenders of New York. And the more I learned about the legal system, the less I understood it. And that's when
Really?
I knew that I was like, there's so many layers of injustice here. And
Mm.
we got to do something about this. I can't just sit around knowing that this is happening and be okay with that.
Yeah.
And so I did that for close to 7 years, including my year and a half as a social work intern and or 2 years, whatever. Um,
Mhm.
and then at a certain point, I definitely was burning out, and it got to the point of I can literally give every part of myself to advocate for people, to make sure that people are seen as human and treated as such. But at the end of the day, that's not. I'm only going to be a blip in the system. I'm at the end of the day, I'm still a
Mm.
gatekeeper. I'm still a part of the system as much as I want to say that I'm fighting it. And that's
Mhm.
not to say that I don't that my mind has changed that the work is important,
Mhm.
but I got to this point of we're seeking liberation here.
Right.
And in me working trying to fight against the system as little old me, it didn't
Mm.
feel like enough. And so I wanted to work with people on that individual level of how can we help you gain your freedom, your sense of liberation, even with all these systems around us? How can we learn to free ourselves
Mm.
while working within the framework, or while still challenging the framework and the
Yeah.
structures that be?
Yep.
But um, yeah, how can we find that personal sense of contentment and peace?
Yeah. You said a couple of things that I wrote down. You said, I wanted to be a social worker since the age of 16, but I felt like I was a blimp in the system. The more that I tried to understand the government, the less I understood it. And then you said, I can literally do everything I can to advocate for other people. And so, like, what I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that it sounded like a really worthy career, but the more you did it, it started to feel like a never-ending battle that had no real solution or direct access to the people that you wanted to work with. And by direct access, I mean the witnessing of personal transformation.
Hmm.
And so when you get to the point where you realize that, it's then that you switch into therapy and like individual work and like helping people want to change that framework.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so tell me what started to change inside of you when you started to realize that. Because what I heard is that, because this is what I know about you, you got your master's degree from Columbia, which is pretty prestigious. You end up working for the federal government of New York, which is
Mhm.
also prestigious. So I'm seeing like
Defenders.
high
Yes.
yeah. Yeah. I'm seeing someone who is in every single way the epitome of success. And yet your soul is going, I don't want to do this anymore. And like tell me the messy middle of that story of like the transition away from a career you thought you would do for your life, I'm assuming,
Yeah.
into what you're doing now. Like what started to change?
Yeah, what's really funny, when I was in social work school, I was so anti-clinical work, and, like,
Mhm.
all of my colleagues who were in social work school to become psychotherapist, I was like, get out of here, go study psychology. You just want the short route to becoming a psychotherapist and make big bucks. Little old me. And now look at where I am. But yeah, I mean, definitely through that, through
Yeah.
working within the legal system, there was just so much pain. And every single day was crisis after crisis. And
Mm.
in particular, my longest job was as forgetting my exact title now. I was an advocate, parent advocate, for parents who had kids in the child welfare system.
Wow.
And so we were going to battle every single day. And and coming from that justice framework, we really came into the work with this idea that if people were given the resources that they need, whether it's
Mm.
mental health care in general, um, and a way out of poverty and out of living in homes that are just not homes, not safe, that
Mm.
their circumstances would be a lot different. The way that they're able to parent would be really different. And so we go into these spaces fully armed and ready to kind of just fight with alongside our client. And often, and like even one of our interview questions that I received and that I would then give to future hirees was, how do you feel about being the most hated person in the room? And
Mm.
that's truly what it felt like every single time that we were in a meeting, whether it was in court or out of court.
Mhm.
And but it was such an honor to be able to support somebody who otherwise may not have had someone on their side. Um, and to be able to hold their hand and say, I believe you, I hear you, I know that you love your children, I know you love your child, and I'm here to fight for the preservation of your family.
Mm.
Of course, there's a lot of nuances along the way, a lot of nitty gritties, and um, supporting parents because, in working in extreme cases of poverty, there's a lot of layers in that. There's a lot of mental health needs, a lot of substance use needs, domestic violence, just you name it, everything was there.
Mhm.
And I felt like I needed to, what was most important to me in all of those um, cases were the relationship that I was able to have with clients. And I also found
Mm.
myself, and I'm sure every therapist has found themselves at this point,
Mhm.
whatever their walk of life was. But I was like the therapist for for my colleagues as well.
Wow.
I was the one who was like holding support circles and the one of the people
Mm.
that others would go to talk to about what was going on, about the major trauma that they just witnessed.
Mm.
Um, and I was like, you know what? Like I think this is where it's calling, the path that is
Mm.
calling me. And
Mm. Yeah. Thank you so much for being vulnerable about that because I had no idea you went through that much crisis in your job.
oh
Like,
yeah,
yeah, like you said body in crisis, like being the most hated person in the room. And so what I'm hearing and learning about who you are as a person is that you're very relationship oriented and human centered,
hmm
and you care more about the person than you do about the perception of what they think of you. And then like your character is just about who am I serving and what am I serving for. And so for the people listening, like the person that you are now, like if they are watching video is very grounded, like very relationship oriented. Like it sounds like you had the elements of the same person, but for a body to be in that much crisis
yeah.
for that many years, like how did you recover from that to get to the point where you could work with individuals? And I want to give background to my question because a lot of the people listening to this podcast are 28 to 34-year-old women who are
Mhm.
working professionals who live in the United States across different states. And so, I'd love for you to speak on recovering from a body in constant crisis and what you know about that.
Yeah.
Like, just share your story.
So about 2.5 years into working as a parent defender, I actually had a major crisis, health crisis. One Monday morning, I woke up, went into the bathroom to get ready for work, and fainted backwards, hit my head on the toilet, and it was like toilet wall
No.
tile floor. And it knocked me out, and like, I had I was living with my sister at the time, but she was sleeping, and I had no capacity to like call for
Oh
her
my
or
gosh.
anything. And it actually took me out for 3 months. And
How
yeah,
old were
I was
you?
on disability leave. I couldn't. It was a never-ending migraine for 3 months.
Wow.
And looking back now, I am able to understand that that was my body shutting down to say, so you can't do this anymore.
Mm.
With the knowledge I have now, if I had it then, I probably would have quit my job and tried something else, become a pizza maker. Who knows? But um, but I didn't, and I actually stayed at that job for another 2.5 years. Although I will also say, because so much of the work was
Mm.
relationship oriented, my colleagues really came through for me and helped take care of me. They set up meal trains. They um, they checked in on me, and they had a schedule of, okay, this person's going to go visit Esther so she's not so alone every single day. And I'm still so thankful for them. And it's just it's
Wow.
double-edged sword kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, and so that I went from being at that point in my life and feeling so burnt out for so long. And then when I transitioned into the therapy space, I did not know that this was what was going to happen, but I was able to better access my healing in becoming a therapist. And to put into context, I had been in therapy for most of that time, or for about 2 years before I even became 2 years, no longer, few years
Mhm.
before I became a therapist. But it wasn't until I became a therapist myself that I was able to understand how angry I was and how much of that anger I was holding in my body. And
Wow.
and that's why somatic work really clicks for me. It's just something that makes sense for me to
Mm.
understand, okay, this is where my anger lives in my body. This is what it feels like. This is where it starts, where it ends. And this is how I'm going to learn to take care of it. And
Mm.
so that's how I take care of myself moving forward. Like even now, and that's why like private practice and like therapy is honestly not that, like, people are like, oh my gosh, you have so many clients, you must be so stressed out. I'm like, no, this is a walk in the park for me compared
Yeah.
to this where I used to be.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, I just continue to, it's helpful for me to continue to check in. All right, where's that anger? Because that anger still lives in me. That anger is still so real.
Mm.
And especially as somebody who's involved in the justice spaces, who's really passionate. And many of my friends and those closest to me are also very much in the forefront of advocacy and fighting on behalf of their communities and beyond. That anger is so real, but also that anger is fuel and power. And as long as we know how to rein it in.
Mm. Wow. That's a really big part of your story, Esther. Like that
Oh, it's like almost dying because of my job.
almost
Yeah.
dying because of your job. Well, I have a similar story, but not to the severity that you had it, because like the first question that came to my mind is like, knowing that you endured that injury at that moment, did you think it was just like an accident?
In that moment, I did.
Okay. Yeah, because you said something that I think isn't very kind to you, and I'm saying this because you're my
Hmm.
friend, but, like, you said, "Had I known what I had known, I shouldn't have stayed at that job for another 2.5 years." But I think how old were you at that time?
24, 25,
Yeah,
something like
you were
that.
really young. You were 24, 25, but also like the culture, giving it context, like the culture and pace of New York City, like you just have to go to work. Like
Yeah.
the city is built around being a hustler, and like they call it a concrete jungle for a reason. Like you live and die by
Hmm.
the hours that you work. But like walk me through, like you talk about excuse me, the anger in your body, and like now being really really, really in tune with how you're feeling and where it sits for you. I want to move into like education now for people that are confused about like, how do I describe how I'm feeling? Can you speak to somatic work and what that does to a person? Like, how does that help you?
Yeah. So I like to use the metaphor of building a spice cabinet, or rather, labeling a spice cabinet.
Okay.
And what I
Yeah.
mean by that is, I and this is how I describe it to clients. I I tell them, all right, you have this cabinet of spices. You have all
Hmm.
these little jars of things, but but they're not labeled. And
Mm.
so the metaphor is that you already have all of these sensations, these feelings, these experiences that you are experiencing on the daily. But when we're not able to label them, we don't actually know what we're working with,
Wow.
right? So,
Mm.
one by one, we're learning to label each of those spices of, okay, anger for me feels hot in my face. It feels heavy in my chest. My jaws start to clench, and I'll get like really. I need to start fidgeting with something. That's how I know
Hmm.
that I'm angry. And
Mm.
when I am able to notice and be aware of that anger coming up for me, I'm then able to also have essentially what's like a safety plan, right? Of, okay, I know that this is what's happening for me, and this is how I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to allow myself to step away if that's what the situation calls for. I'm going to allow myself to drink a cold cup of water or a relaxing cup of tea.
Hmm.
I'm just gonna learn to take a few breaths, do some tapping, whatever it may be. Um, and each of our feelings is a label just waiting to be stuck onto that jar of paprika, whatever it,
Yeah.
whatever it is that we're working with. Um,
Yeah.
and so as we continue our practice of mindfulness and noticing, every time you notice the sensations of calmness or lightness in your chest, you might know that then you're feeling content, or that, or if you feel these other things, that you're feeling really annoyed. And so you're going to take care of yourself in this other way. Um,
Mm.
and mm, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, you've shared this with me before, but I just love the analogy of the spices because they all have a distinct taste. Like salt is very different from pepper, and pepper is very different from chipotle seasoning or tahini, you know. But it takes being able to understand what it feels like in your body and how the sensation goes down.
Hmm.
So, like when someone's just learning about somatics, like how do they get curious about labeling the emotion? Like it's because you talk about anger and how you know it's anger when it's hot on your face. For people that don't even know feelings or like can't even describe what starts to happen to their body when they experience emotion, like what would you recommend the first like 2 or 3 steps be?
But is always to pause and pay
Okay.
attention.
Mm.
Because so often, and especially living in the hustler culture that we do, it's so easy to
Mhm.
be like, oh, something's happening for me and I don't have time to pay attention to it right now, so I'm just going to keep pushing.
Mm.
And
Wow.
so when you instead choose to pause and actually pay attention, you might notice some things. You might not exactly know
Mm.
how to even describe them, um, or how to, yeah, like, and you certainly don't know what to do with them. But when you start to notice, it like opens up another portal for us. And so first you
Mm.
pause to notice. I would even say that that's the second one. And then third would be to um, just pay attention to what is the need that your body is communicating to you.
Mm.
And often I think that can be kind of a bigger question that sometimes people are like, what? But I do think that there's so much wisdom that our bodies hold if only we're
Yeah.
able to pay attention.
Mm. Mm. Pause. What does my body need? That's so easy.
Hmm.
That's so good. Thank you, Esther. I mean, I've never heard someone describe that to me before. You know, I think, well, I'm going to acknowledge you for a second because I think that it speaks to the amount of work that you've probably done on yourself to be able to synthesize it at this simple level. Like you talk about like the moment you stop learning is the moment you die. I also think that like the moment you stop being curious about yourself, you also start to die. Because like
Mm-hmm.
we think we know everything there is to know about ourselves because we're always with ourselves.
Hmm.
But just out of the leaning into curiosity piece, how has this work changed your life? Like what changes, whether really tiny throughout your day or even significant, have you started to notice relationally, physically? Like,
I
yeah.
think, yeah, it's a great question. Um, I really do think that my relationships have gotten so much deeper. Not not just with
Mm,
others around me, but with myself too. I'm able to understand myself better. I'm able to um I another analogy is I like to think of people and their stories as a constellation.
yeah.
And so there's all these stars that mark the milestones or the highlights of our personality, the pieces of ourselves that make us who we are. And it's a
Hmm.
matter of identifying those stars so that we can
Hmm.
learn to connect the dots.
Mm,
And I feel like I'm really able to better understand my constellation and my the life that I have lived so far to understand who I am now. And I am certainly not perfect. I am very much still in the works. And with this information that I have now, how do I want to move forward with that? How do I want to then become the person that I want to be, that I was always meant to be? And
mm.
yeah.
Who is Esther? Who are you meant to be, like, given this information? Just, like, putting the
Oh,
question back on you.
yeah. Oh my gosh. I would say I think I was always meant to be a healer. And I have
Mm,
only started to really connect with that in the last year and a half, 2 years, probably.
mm,
But in since coming back to California, I've really been able to spend more time in nature. And in spending more time with nature, I've started learning the language of plants, and I've
that's so
gotten
good.
into herbalism and got an ethnobotany certification. And I'm learning how to. I've taken basket weaving with natural fibers, even, and not
Yeah.
necessarily that doesn't necessarily have to do with the healing identity, but it's just like,
But it's like, it's tactile. It's like experiencing things with your hands,
mm-hmm,
you know? I think it's a lost art because a lot of people are becoming knowledge workers. So
yeah,
when you're able to say like what's happening in here and like what are you doing with these hands? Like
mm-hmm,
that, I think that's what separates humanity from the rest of the creatures. We have
mm-hmm,
opposable thumbs.
yeah,
And so what are you doing? You don't need thumbs for a keypad, you know?
mm-hmm.
But like tell me about like basket weaving, for example. Like what makes you come alive when you do basket weaving?
Well, I'll talk about herbalism because I it was like the basket weaving was
Okay.
like one class that I took for fun, and so it
Okay.
was not
Okay.
practicing. But the herbalism,
Understood.
what comes alive when I'm really able to access not just that knowledge base of I know that these herbs have these have these medicinal properties, but it's what's equally important to the power of the herbs is the energy that you bring into the space. Like
Mm,
even for example, like even when you're cooking, right? If you're cooking while you're angry or you're sad, your food is not going to come out well.
Really?
So when you're making medicine or even when
I
you're,
did
whether it's
not know that.
foraging, or you're assembling and making an herbal mix, whatever you're trying to do with that, you have to have good intentions. You have to be of clear mind, of clear heart
Mm.
for that medicine to have an impact on the person that you're treating or that person that you're taking care of.
That is so good, Esther.
And
In
it's a
order,
real hard, you know, like,
whoa. Okay, so I think this like this is so cool. Like your intentions play a role in how something comes out or the result of something.
mhm.
And so can you tell me more about that? Like how can you cultivate better intentions when you are cooking or when you are like I feel like that applies too with relationships, don't you think?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
speak to that. Like good intentions.
Intentions are like the roadmap. Intentions are like the values. It's the roadmap that'll get us to where we want to be.
Interesting.
And
So that what you're saying is the intention dictates the destination or the
it
journey?
dictates the
Both.
destination, but also the journey of how do we want to get there?
Interesting.
How do we want to achieve
Wow.
a healthy relationship or good
Wow.
communication?
Okay.
And that,
Intentions dictate the journey.
hmm.
Okay. How you're going to get there. Okay. You're breaking it down for me. I'm starting to understand. Okay. So, okay, let's say I'd love for you to apply this in a friendship or a romantic relationship because I feel like a lot of the reason why I'm asking this is because a lot of our interest when it comes to the podcast has a lot to do with our relationship with ourselves and our
Hmm.
relationship to other people.
Hmm.
And even on our Instagram at Yellow Chair Collective, we get a lot of interest on like, how do I navigate relationships well? And so the concepts in herbalism, because humanity is attached to nature and there are rules in nature that are inherent also in relationships, right?
Yeah.
So, like you said, intentions dictate the journey, how you're going to get there.
Hmm.
So, speak to like how those same lessons and tools apply to a romantic relationship or a friendship.
Yeah. I mean, so a goal could be I want to have a good relationship with my partner,
Uh-huh.
right? Which is like, okay, cool. What does that mean though? Right? Like, what does it
Okay.
mean to have a good relationship with somebody? Is it healthy communication? Is it being able to laugh together or being
Mm,
able to work as a team?
okay.
And those are the intentions that you're setting then, right? My intent, I want to be able to have fun with my partner. I want to be able to work as a team with them, whatever it is, whatever challenge that we're facing together.
Mhm.
And so in setting that roadmap of when in thinking about a roadmap, whenever you then reach a fork in the road of okay, this situation has arose, and we can either choose to fall back to our old patterns of maybe it's yelling, kicking, and screaming, whatever it looks like, or we can choose to be mindful of how we are showing up in the space of what's coming up for us in our bodies, to then be able to communicate that with our partner and say, this is how I'm feeling, this is what I need. And how can we work together to meet each other's needs, even and not see the other person as the problem or the source of the conflict, but rather the problem as the problem and this person as my teammate.
Mm, yeah. So, okay, I'm going to give you a scenario. Um, let's say that there is a woman listening to this podcast. She is 30 years old
Mhm.
and she is interested in cultivating a really healthy romantic partnership. And she is listening to this and she's going, okay, Esther, you're telling me that our intentions are like a roadmap And when you broke down your intentions, you gave the example of, I want to have a really healthy romantic partnership, right?
Mhm.
And so she already knows that in her head. She's a strong, accomplished, career oriented woman, like a lot of the clients that we get at Yellow Chair. And she
Mhm.
has her standards. How then does she go about setting those intentions in her romantic partnership?
Eh, would start with the values. What are the values
Mm,
that are important to you as a person, and particularly as a person in relationship with others?
yeah,
Maybe,
yeah,
and those values can also shift and change, and they're very much permeable, but I would start with just one value. Maybe it's kindness, maybe it's empathy,
I love
maybe,
this.
or maybe you want to just focus on learning to understand. And that even that always goes back to that curiosity of,
Mm,
I want to learn to understand why my partner is behaving in this way, or why my partner's behaviors impact me in this way.
hmm.
And then, and the more that you engage with that value and have that kind of be your guiding light or the North Star, then you're able to get to this other place that might feel really
Oof,
unfamiliar.
that's good. That's really good. Mm-mm-mm. You
And
know
it,
what I love? Go ahead. Sorry, what
oh,
were you going to say?
no, just like, and then that opens up so many more doors of possibilities.
Wow. I feel that in my chest because I you already know this about me, but like I love taking notes because it helps me really understand what someone's saying. But what I love about what you said is it's not about expecting kindness from your partner. It's
Mm-hmm.
about living out the kindness so that you set that standard. And I think one of the most powerful things about these lessons in nature with herbalism and with somatics is that rather than judging the outer world and how the outer world makes you feel, you're going, what is my connection to this person or to this situation? And what value do I want to exhibit in relation to this experience? And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm really grateful for this because even personally, I'm going, oh, what is it that I want to evoke in my life? And so for you, Esther, just out of curiosity, what values are you learning to live out in your personal and self relationship? And how are you going to
My,
go about that?
yeah, I think. Oh, so um, I've been reflecting on this as this. It is the beginning of the year, and my two words for the year that I've chosen are reverence and release.
Oof. Why those two?
Because I am such a type A personality, and I think that need for control
Yeah.
is really rooted in my lack of ability to trust others.
So that's what release is for you?
Yeah,
Okay.
releasing the need for control, but
Okay.
in then practicing and seeing people through the lens of reverence, then I'm also able to build that trust
Oh.
and respect that
Oh,
that person will
wow.
actually show up for me. That I don't
I
have to
love
be the one who
this.
has to do all the things on my own terms, on my own with my own resources and energy, but that I can trust others to show up for me as I need them to too.
I love that. Reverence and release. And it's all about how you're perceiving the world and other people.
Hmm.
That's so good. So how are you keeping yourself accountable? It's at the time of this recording, it's January 15th. So we're like 2 weeks into the new year. What practices are you putting in place to get there? And I'm literally going nitty gritty because I'm so curious about this. I don't mean to make it sound interrogating.
No, it's not interrogating at all. And
Okay,
in
good.
fact, it's so interesting that you asked this question because I've been beating myself up for the last week or so because last weekend I had a fabulous girls trip with my childhood friends and it was
Mhm,
incredible and amazing and I love them so dearly. And I
mhm.
found myself actually walking away from that experience feeling kind of disconnected. Like these are my best
Really?
friends since we were 11 years old. And so for me to have walked away from a weekend trip with the loves of my life, feeling
Mm-hmm.
disconnected, I had to be like, okay, Esther, what's going on? Like, this is about you. It's not
Mm-hmm.
about that.
You're right. Mm-hmm.
And I went into that, that real great familiar shame spiral of, Esther, you chose these words of reverence and release 2 weeks ago, and then a weekend you already failed. And like, I went into that shame spiral. I think part of it had to do with my period, I'll be honest. But I once, but then after sitting with it for a few days and talking to my therapist about it, I was like,
Uh-huh.
Esther, like if you were talking to a friend about this or you were talking to a client about this, you would offer them so much more grace and compassion for the process,
Oh,
because I'm always preaching it's about the practice, not about the success rate.
yes.
And that was a perfect example for me in my life, for me to learn from,
Mm.
that yes, I set these intentions and I wasn't necessarily able to practice it to the fullest extent. And this is just
Mm-hmm.
another experience that I'm building upon and from,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm able to offer myself kindness in the bouncing back, in the learning from.
Wow. One thing that stuck out to me about what you said is, and I'm getting emotional about this because I'm also very type A and very perfectionist as well. But you said it's about the process, not about the success rate. And
Mhm,
that's so vulnerable for you to say because partly I'm getting emotional because to watch you go through this journey of like burning out and like giving yourself over to this government job and then going on this really humble journey of going, I have to start with me and I have to really work on me. And like, how does that translate into what I do? Like, thank you so much for sharing all of these like heart driven lessons that you've had because like a lot of these lessons that you're imparting on us have a lot to do with the personal work that you've done on yourself. And
mhm.
I'm just really grateful. Like I want to be respectful of your time because we're going over our hour, but like Esther, today I'm learning so much about what it means to surrender, to like start with yourself and to have your intentions be the driver. It takes away all of these like social platitudes we've had in our heads of like, this is what life should be.
Mhm,
And it's giving space for imagination about like, what could life be if I started with what I value and not making it be about the result, but about like the process you're undergoing. And so, thank you so much. Um, Seriously, thank you.
thank you. You ask, you're so good at this, Helen. Oh my gosh, I'm just
Thanks, Esther. I want to end with this question.
yeah.
So, let's say you come across a time machine and you're allowed to go back to one moment of your life, the
Hmm.
future or the past. Where would you go and tell me why?
Going to observe or to change something?
To change. So, you can do either, honestly, because I'm realizing the question was like future or past. So, to do whatever.
I would go maybe to the future, only to observe. I wouldn't
Interesting.
go if you had asked the
Interesting.
question of where would you go to change something, I would say nothing. Because
That's why I said future.
yeah, because I fully ag- I f- I truly believe that we go through the phases of our lives and experiences exactly for a purpose. And even where I am right now
Mm.
is exactly where I need to be right now.
Whoa.
But if I were to go in the future, well, I don't know. Maybe that's even for the observation, I would say I wouldn't go anywhere. But if I were to run with it, I would say I would go into the future to see what my relationships are looking like in, let's say the next 10, 15 years. And if I
Yeah.
don't like what I'm seeing, then I'll make changes in my present so that I'm
Wow.
setting those intentions to create healthy relationships and live the life that I want to live 10, 15
Mm.
years from
That's so good. That's good. Esther, thank you so much for a great podcast interview. This was so good.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
I'm going to stop recording now.